looking for you. Scooby Doo, where are you? All the stars are here, waiting for you. Couldn't have a show without you. Scooby, Scooby-Doo, Scooby, Scooby-Doo.
Hello, Scooby Doo fans! Welcome to my Season 1 Episode 14 review of the new Scooby Doo Movies. So last time I continued my 2024 Summer Special with my review of Season 1 Episode 9 of Scooby Doo, Where Are You? I hope you guys enjoyed that re-review. But of course today, I'll be covering Season 1 Episode 14 of the new Scooby Doo Movies, titled The Phantom of the Country Music Hall, which was released on December 9th, 1972. The short synopsis of the episode is, the kids are going to meet their friend, Jerry Reed, at the Grand Ole Country Music Hall, but when they get there, they can't find him. However, they can hear him singing and try to track him down and then figure out who wants to keep the hall closed. So today's guest star is Jerry Reed. Who is Jerry Reed? Well, he's an old school country music singer, really. He's not someone that people my age or younger or even from the 90s or anything would be familiar with. Unless if you're like somebody from the 60s and 70s who was around when Jerry Reed produced his music and released it, you're not going to be familiar with Jerry Reed. I mean, he did do a little bit of music after the 60s and 70s, but 60s and 70s, he was pretty big around that time. And he did a little bit of acting as well, but for the most part, I doubt most of you modern people know who Jerry Reed is, unless if you're like if you're a big classic music fan, especially, or classic country fan, or country fan in general, or if you just were around in that time. Otherwise, you're probably not going to be too familiar with Jerry Reed, so here's just a quick rundown of who Jerry Reed is. So Jerry Reed was an American country singer, guitarist, composer, songwriter, and actor. He was born on March 20th, 1937 in Atlanta, Georgia. And Jerry Reed has done so many albums all the way from the 1960s, all the way up to the 2000s, which was his last decade that he was alive. And I'd be here all day if I went over all of his albums. He has so many of his albums that, unlike the other musicians, where it was a little bit easier to kind of cover their albums, Jerry Reed has way too many for me to count. So instead, I'm just going to list off his most well-known hit songs that he produced. So Jerry Reed's most well-known hit songs include Guitar Man, U.S. Mail, A Thing Called Love, Alabama Wild Man, Amos Moses, When You're Hot, You're Hot, Coco Joe, Lord Mr. Ford, Eastbound and Down, The Bird, and She Got the Gold Mine. Now, acting-wise, surprisingly, this episode was actually Jerry Reed's first acting gig. This is the first time he had ever dipped his toe in any sort of acting. So this episode was the first instance where he provided, not only his voice for, a cartoon, but just did any acting in general. But obviously he did his acting career did span a little bit afterwards. It wasn't that long. I think he acted from like the 70s, from this episode, early 1970s, up until the late 1990s. But here's just a couple of his most memorable roles in his acting career. So his other memorable roles include the first Smokey and the Bandit movie, where he played Cletus Snow. He did 2 episodes of Alice where he played himself. He did the Concrete Cowboys movie where he plays J.D. Reed. He did Smokey and the Bandit 2 where he once again played Cletus Snow. He did the Concrete Cowboys TV show where he played J.D. Reed as part of the main cast for about 7 episodes. He did Smokey and the Bandit Part 3 where he once again reprised this role of Cletus Snow. And his final acting role was in The Waterboy, where he played Coach Red Ballou. Now, at the time of this episode, like I said previously, this was Jerry Reed's first time dipping his toe into the acting sphere. So, he was really doing music at this time. Now, he had 2 albums that he released under the RCA Records in 1972. The first one was called Smell the Flowers, and the other one was simply just called Jerry Reed. Now, what's interesting about the Jerry Reed album is that actually contains one of his hit songs, which is Alabama Wild Man. Sadly, at the time we're recording this, Jerry Reed has since passed away. He passed away on September 1st, 2008 in Nashville, Tennessee. So as per usual, I'll be watching Season 1, Episode 14 of the new Scooby Doo Movies on the new Scooby Doo Movies, the Almost Complete Collection. This collection has every episode of the new Scooby Doo Movies, minus the Addams Family episode, which if you want to know more about, I go into it in my episode 3 review, which is the Addams Family 1. Now, I'm personally not a fan of Jerry Reed. He's way too old school for me. I'm not really a country, fan myself. I don't really listen to country music. I mean, I'm not a big music guy in general, but country music is not my kind of thing. So obviously, I wouldn't know him at all. But he's also just an old school musician that I'm just not familiar with. He just was before my time. The only thing out of his acting credentials that really stands out to me is that his final role in The Waterboy. I have watched The Waterboy when I was younger. It's been a while, but that's interesting that he was in that. I'll definitely have to go back and watch that someday and see that again, because that's pretty cool. But outside of that, none of his other stuff really stands out to me. I've never watched the Smokey and the Bandit movies. I've never listened to his music. And I've never seen him in any of his other famous roles as well. So he's pretty foreign to me. I'm not really that big of a Jerry Reed fan myself. Not only because he's old school, but I just don't like country music in general. But I want to ask you guys, what's your opinion on Jerry Reed? Are you a big fan of his? Not really. And what do you think of him as a guest star in the new Scooby Doo movies? Do you think he was a good fit? Do you not think he was a good fit? Let me know in the comments below. Now, as far as how this episode is received, I believe most fans aren't really that huge on it, as it's not really an episode that well talked about when it comes to the new Scooby Doo movies. They're definitely, this is probably one of the least talked about. It's up there with the Davy Jones one, where it's not really talked about that much and isn't really one that people in the Scooby Doo community really hold up in high regard. So it is going to be, so I guess the big question is, looking at this episode, do I believe this is an underrated gem? Or do I believe it's not talked about for a reason? Well, why don't we take a look at the episode to see whether I think it is a good or bad episode of the new Scooby Doo movies. The episode begins with the gang driving through Nashville in the Mystery Machine to see Jerry Reed's opening at the Grand Ole Country Music Hall. They stop at the Andrew Jackson Hotel, where the receptionist tells them that Jerry Reed isn't there. The receptionist hands Freddie a note that says this:
"Come to the Grand Ole Country Music Hall. I'm rehearsing there for tomorrow night's show, Jerry."
The gang leave the hotel and head to the Grand Ole Country Music Hall. The hall has been closed for a year, and they want to open it with a bang, so they schedule Jerry Reed in as the big attraction. The doors are locked, and no lights are on, which the gang find unusual. Sniffing at the door, Scooby finds another note that says this:
"Jerry Reed, if you try to rehearse tonight, you'll never see tomorrow. Signed, the Phantom."
Zoinks! The Phantom!
The gang find a way into the Grand Ole Country Music Hall by MacGyvering their way in through a second-story window, as they use poor Shaggy, they put poor Shaggy into a catapult and catapult him all the way to the second-story window, and this is one of 3 to 4 attempts on Shaggy's safety and his life. And I think it's one of the main reasons, one of the main complaints I'm going to have of the episode is the gang putting Shaggy and Scooby's safety in danger, which this will not be the last time they do so. As they split up to search for clues, they meet the janitor, Bertha, who wants them to leave. Freddy explains that they're looking for Jerry, and then calls up a mysterious person stating that they have snoopers. In the theater room, the gang turn on the lights and the stage backdrop move their eyes at them before the whole thing falls, nearly hurting the gang. We then hear Jerry Reed begin playing, so the gang starts to follow the music. Interesting to note is that Jerry Reed is singing Pretty Mary Sunlight, the chase song for Season 2, Episode 8, which is the Wax Phantom episode, and was the final chase song for a while. It's interesting that we've had 2 episodes in a row where we've had music a pretty big deal, which is obvious, which makes sense because Davy Jones was also a musician, but they used Jerry Reed's vocal talents by having him sing another Austin Roberts song. And I think for what it's worth, Jerry Reed does a good job singing this song. Obviously, it doesn't beat the first version, but he did a pretty good job singing it, so I give him props for that. Upon opening the first door, they meet a rather large man who explains that Jerry isn't there and the music they hear is just a recording. The man introduces himself as Ben Bing, and he's Jerry's arranger. Ben leads the gang back outside and tells them that Jerry is probably at the local pizza parlor and that's where they should head off to. Shaggy also comments on Ben's license plate that says Feebag on it. The gang drive off to the pizza parlor, and on the radio they hear the Second National Bank was robbed of $2 million as they chomp down on some pizza, and Shaggy and Scooby really go all out with the pizza. I think they have like anchovies and ice cream and hot fudge on it. You know, and then Shaggy wanted dessert afterwards, but he kind of mixed dessert with his dinner, so I don't know why he wanted both, but I guess that just goes to show Shaggy wanted more. But I will say it looks pretty good. I mean, I don't know if it actually would be good. I probably wouldn't like the anchovies at all. I hate toppings on my pizza, but maybe it might be good. I don't know. But it definitely looks good in the cartoon. After a quick snack, the gang head back to the country music hall, and once again the hall is locked up. Bertha and Ben do their best to keep the gang out by locking the doors and windows, but Velma finds a way in. This is due to the fact that Shaggy turns the knob the wrong way, so they once again put poor Shaggy onto the catapult and do the old catapult trick a second time, and poor Shaggy, you know, Bertha closes the window and Shaggy fucking hits it, and it hurts him so badly. And this is like, again, another instance where they put Shaggy's safety in danger. I'm not liking that they're doing this. I don't care if it's a cartoon. It's mean-spirited, and it's not good for Shaggy's safety to toss him in there. I hate seeing the gang do that, and I feel bad for poor old Shaggy who has to endure this pain. But Velma eventually figures out that Shaggy just turned the doorknob the wrong way, and that's how they get inside. So that was all for nothing, and they just made Shaggy go through torment a second time with that fucking catapult trick. Inside, they hear Jerry's voice singing, and the gang decide to split up to investigate. Throughout their search, the gang encountered plenty of weirdness throughout, as such as, you know, living statues of a Viking and Davy Crockett. And throughout all these hijinks, Jerry continues to play Pretty Mary Sunlight that the gang can hear through the vents. Velma also can talk to Jerry, who explains he's in some room and it's locked up. Freddy finally finds the right door and knocks it down, rescuing Jerry Reed. Jerry explains that he was standing on the stage rehearsing and the lights went out, and after hearing some chains clanking, he found himself locked in the room. Which is very weird. I don't know how, like, how did they do that? Did they just scare him into going into that room? Did he not know where he was going? It's a bit of a weird thing, because all he said was the lights went out and he heard some chains clanking. I don't know how he would end up in a room back there if he only heard chains clanking and while the lights were out. Unless if he was scared into that room, which might be the case. Jerry tells the gang to head back to the hotel while he remains and continues to rehearse, but Freddy won't hear any of it, as he thinks they should just stay to keep an eye on Jerry Reed and make sure he's okay and doesn't get disrupted any further by whoever's doing all these hijinks and all these weirdness. Bertha barges in and once again tells the gang to get lost. During their conversation, somebody swipes Jerry's guitar. The gang asks Jerry about Ben Bing, and Jerry explains he's never heard of the man, nor has he ever had an arranger. So everyone splits up once more to look for Jerry's guitar, with Velma and Jerry heading one way, Scooby and Shaggy going another, and Freddy and Daphne heading off in another direction. More hijinks, of course, occur, with multiple trapdoors and opera props triggered to scare the gang. We also discover that Bertha has Jerry's guitar, as Velma also discovers the trapdoor control panel, and Jerry also finds his jewel-encrusted guitar. Everyone reunites, and Velma decides it's time for a trap, to just lay out a trap for the villains. Now, I'm going to let this scene play out, because I have a couple comments to say with Velma's logic on why Shaggy and Scooby should need to be the bait for this trap, rather than any of the others.
Any volunteers?
I'll do it.
No.
No.
We need Fred's strength to help us set the trap.
I'll do it.
Jerry has to remain on stage to make them think we're going about our business as usual. That leaves you and Scooby.
You didn't run out of volunteers yet. Give Daphne a chance.
The girl can't do it. And since you're the only men left, we accept your brave offer to volunteer. The Phantom is up there somewhere.
The Phantom?
Let him find you
Us?
and lure him into our trap.
You know, gang, I'm never going to be able to thank you enough for this.
Nobody could handle it as well as Scooby and Shaggy.
This has got to be the most forced and contrived reasoning for making Shaggy and Scooby be the bait of a trap. And Velma's explanation and reasoning as to why they have to be the bait is absolute dog shit. So first, Fred volunteers himself to be the bait for the trap, which would have been nice. But then she shuts him down, saying that they need his strength for the trap. You don't need his strength for the trap. Not at all. I'm sorry, like, did we forget that Shaggy and Scooby were pretty fucking strong in Foul Play in Funland and Never 8-Bit 8-Man? They were quite strong in those 2 episodes, so they got quite the good inner strength. So that's very rude and mean and cruel for Velma to assume that Shaggy and Scooby don't have the strength to set the trap. I think that's absolute horseshit, and I think Fred could have easily been the bait. That's dog shit. That doesn't make any sense. But okay, then Jerry Reed decides to volunteer as the bait for the trap. She shuts him down, saying that they need him on the stage to make it look like everything's normal. You don't need Jerry Reed on the stage to make everything look normal. As I said before, yeah, they see the jewel-encrusted guitar up there, but they haven't gotten it yet. You know, they haven't gotten the guitar left. If anything, it would make more sense for Jerry Reed to go explore and find his guitar and lure the villains to the gang and their trap. It wouldn't alarm the villains that he wouldn't, be on the stage. In fact, it would make sense. He lost his guitar. He's gonna go search for it. I sure as hell would if I lost my fucking instrument. So that's stupid. And Velma's like, okay, that just leaves you two. And Shaggy Shaggy says, wait, what about, Daphne? What about you? What about... And she's like, a girl can't do it. That's it. She just says, a girl can't do it. Yes, a girl can fucking do it. You're telling me neither Daphne or yourself, Velma, could do this, be the bait for this trap? Are you serious? That's like some bad... quite borderline sexist shit to just say, oh no, a woman can't be the bait for the trap. It's gotta be you two. It's gotta be the males. Bullshit, Velma. You just don't want to do it yourself. And you don't want to have, none of the, I appreciate that at least Fred and Jerry Reed tried to, but I'm pissed that Velma shut them down and made I think out of all the reasonings, the last one of them being just females, so that automatically means they can't do it. There's been plenty of horror movies where females have been bait villains into traps. You're telling me that a female wouldn't work as bait for a trap? Are you serious, Velma? This is absolute horseshit, and I feel bad for Shaggy and Scooby. This is probably the worst scene in the episode, and probably the main scene that I'll point to as to why this episode is really hindered, as I'll get into my outro, because this scene is just bad. I don't like the explanations at all. They're awful. There is no reason that any of the other members of the gang or Jerry Reed could have been the bait rather than Shaggy and Scooby. Absolute horseshit. I feel so bad for Shaggy and Scooby. They were way too kind and way too forgiving to their friends, who were being quite cruel in this episode and being more cowardly than them. Because if they were actually fucking brave, they would do it themselves. This scene really pisses me off. I cannot stress how angry this makes me that Shaggy and Scooby were forced to be bait for this trap when there were plenty of other options and plenty of other characters that could have done it. But no, we have to make Shaggy and Scooby the bait. Anyways, moving on, using Shaggy and Scooby as bait, we watch as the Viking and David Crockett, chase Scooby and Shaggy. Velma's trap goes off without a hitch, and they discover that Bertha is a man and disguised as Davy Crockett. Meanwhile, Ben Bing is dressed as a Viking. And they are more concerned about, once again, they put Shaggy and Scooby's safety in danger as Shaggy and Scooby hit one of the backdrops and then fall through a trap door while they catch the villains. And they wait until after the villains are caught and revealed to check on them. God, this is just an awful episode for Fred, Daphne, and Velma. I'm not liking how they are in this episode. We also never find out who Bertha, the man, her actual name is. So I'm just gonna refer to him as Bertha, even though she's like an actual man. Well, I'm just gonna call him Bertha because that's the name he went with in the episode. We never got a name for him. But anyways, a note with feedback falls from Ben, and Jerry picks it up, recognizing it as musical letters. Remembering Shaggy talking about a haunted xylophone, Jerry uses the keys to put in feedback, and a secret panel underneath the stage opens, revealing the $2 million stolen from the bank, which connects back to the radio announcement from earlier when the gang were at the pizza parlor. Ben and Bertha spent a year while the opera was closed to dig a tunnel so they could rob the bank. The sheriff congratulates the gang and heads off with the criminals. And the episode ends with another mystery solved, and Jerry puts on his show the next evening for the gang, with the gang getting front row seats to it, and Scooby even making a reference to one of Jerry Reed's popular songs, When You're Hot, You're Hot. I'm going to give Season 1, Episode 14 of the new Scooby Doo Movies 1 star out of 5. Yeah, I didn't really like this episode at all. This was definitely one of my least favorites of the new Scooby Doo movies, if not my least favorite. It's definitely contending with that Harlem Globetrotters one for being the worst episode of the new Scooby Doo movies. And I'll get into why I don't like it in a little bit, but I guess before I get into my negatives, I should talk about the good things and talk about what's good about this episode and the positives for it. So let's start off with the positives of the episode. To start off the positives, my first one is that I thought Shaggy and Scooby were good in this episode. They were their usual cowardly selves, but what was interesting about this episode was definitely seeing Shaggy play the xylophone and showing off his skill for the xylophone, saying that he took lessons. Although Scooby and the rest of the gang weren't impressed with his playing, which I kind of feel bad that, they didn't applaud Shaggy for his skills. Because honestly, listening to it, I didn't think Shaggy did a bad job. So I don't know why the rest of the gang didn't like him playing the xylophone. But I thought it was cool that we got to see Shaggy play the xylophone and learn that he's pretty good with a little instrument. Although Jerry Reed is pretty rude when he calls it a child's instrument. And Shaggy's like, no, this is an actual instrument. Which it is. And so I did think that was cool. But I also kind of feel bad for them at the same time, too. Because, like I said previously throughout the review, I didn't like how they were treated by Fred, Daphne, and Velma in this episode. I thought it was very terrible the way their friends treated them. I felt they were much more kind and forgiving to them than they should have been. Because, oh man, I'll go into it with Fred, Daphne, and Velma. But I didn't like how they did that. Did all that stuff for, made Shaggy and Scooby, were mean to them, risked their safety, and I felt bad for Shaggy and Scooby. I felt like they were treated poorly by their friends, and that shouldn't be the case. I should feel like these are a group of friends, and I don't feel like Fred, Daphne, Velma treated them well, and were kind of rude and mean to them, and pretty cruel to them in this episode. But for what it's worth, I thought Shaggy and Scooby were good. They were their usual kind, forgiving selves to their friends. They were, Shaggy got to play the xylophone, which was cool. They were their usual cowardly selves. And they were a little bit brave for, just being like, whatever, we'll just be the bait for the trap, despite the bullshit reasoning that Velma comes up with for it. And the last positive that I have is the setting of the episode. I thought the setting was fine. It worked for the episode. I don't think it was amazing or anything. It's quite similar to the Backstage Rage, which was the last review I did, where it was very much like a theater, but it definitely was more expanded upon than the Backstage Rage. We got to explore a lot more in this music hall or theater in this episode. So I thought it was something new and fresh. I thought it was a nice, cool little setting to have the gang be in a theater investigating strange happenings, especially an old theater that's about to be reopened. I thought it was pretty cool the way the setting of the episode. I think it was new and fresh, but I think it worked for the episode. I don't think it's amazing or anything. I don't think it's the best Scooby Doo setting in the world. I think there's much better ones out there. But for what it's worth, the potential was definitely there. They definitely didn't explore upon it, but I will give them credit for coming up with a good setting in this episode and expanding upon a previous setting, a setting that was used in Where Are You, and kind of expanding upon it more and giving us more to explore in the theater rather than just the little areas that they did in the Backstage Rage. I feel like they got to explore way more in this theater. That's all I got for positives, though, so I think it's about time we get on to the negatives of the episode. And what really makes this episode bad? Oh boy, where to begin with these problems? I guess, to start off the negatives, we'll talk about Fred, Daphne, and Velma, who I just mentioned earlier. Oh, and by God, Fred, Daphne, and Velma were just bad in this episode. I'll give a minor positive some credit to this. I think Velma was somewhat of a good leader, and I did like her improvising, creating a trap rather than Fred. So for what it's worth, Velma did have two good qualities in this episode. She was a little bit more kind of like the leader of this episode, and she did help set up a trap, which I thought was cool. But on the other hand, I didn't like how they acted towards Shaggy and Scooby. I'm just going to go back to it. They were very cruel and mean towards Shaggy and Scooby. I did not like how they acted towards them, especially Shaggy. They put, especially Shaggy, but both Shaggy and Scooby, they put their safety at risk at least 3 to 4 times in this episode. They catapulted Shaggy twice towards a window, which could have easily hurt him. Shaggy and Scooby, as the bait of the trap, run into the one of the backdrops and fall through another trapdoor, and they don't even check until the villains are caught before asking if they're okay. And I think there might have been another instance where they were, where they almost got hurt. But Jesus Christ, not only did Fred, Daphne do nothing, but they also were not helpful in the slightest. I mean, I'm glad Fred at least volunteered. Daphne felt like she did absolutely nothing in this episode, but it was, I think, even though Velma was mainly the one who was mean and cruel towards Shaggy and Scooby, Fred and Daphne didn't help things much either. They were very useless in the grand scheme of things, and they didn't help, and they kind of had snarky remarks towards them as well as Velma. So I feel like all three of them were very out of character in this episode. They were way too mean, way too cruel towards Shaggy and Scooby. This is not how I want Fred, Daphne, and Velma to interact with their friends. I don't care if it's if people call it realistic. It's not realistic to me. I want to see the gang interacting well. I want to see them have good chemistry. I want to see them acting like friends. I don't need drama. I don't need them being rude to each other. And I think Fred, Daphne, and Velma were way too cruel, way too mean, and way too rude towards Shaggy and Scooby. So for that, I don't like this episode for that. It made me not like Fred, Daphne, and Velma, and that's not the feeling that I want. I want to like them. I want to find good in them. But there wasn't any good in them in this episode because they were fucking awful towards their friends. So big thumbs down for me with these characters. Fred, Daphne, and Velma were awful. Didn't like how they treat Shaggy and Scooby in this episode. So then we have the guest star of the episode, Jerry Reed. I didn't like Jerry Reed at all in this episode. Now, he was kind of similar to Sandy Duncan, where for at least the first half of the episode, he was out of the picture and we only heard him singing. Although unlike Sandy Duncan, I feel like it makes sense because he was, locked into a room. But my biggest problem with Jerry Reed is the same two things that I always look for guest stars. Do they help solve the mystery? Do they have good chemistry with the gang, or both? I don't feel Jerry Reed does either. I don't think he tries to help solve the mystery. Not once. When they save him and rescue him, all he cares about is just rehearsing and finding his guitar. Which, yeah, he's a musician, but he's going to do that. But you would think he'd be like, oh, there's some weird things going on that are distracting me from my performance. Why don't I get rid of it so I can continue rehearsing as normal? You think he would want to do that, but he doesn't. He doesn't give two fucks. He just wants to rehearse and doesn't give a shit about the mystery or the weird occurrences going on. And all he cares about is guitar. And when it comes to the chemistry with the gang, I don't feel he had any chemistry with the gang at all. Him and Velma had a small amount of moments. I don't think it was enough. I don't think it was enough for me to sell it. I don't think he had any chemistry at all towards the gang. And this is weird because this is the only episode where the gang says that the guest star is their best friend. You know, a friend of theirs. Well, I don't get the sense of that in this episode. I don't get the sense that Jerry Reed has been friends with the gang for a while. Not one bit. He gives no good chemistry with the gang at all. I feel he was useless and was wasted in this episode. I will say I did like him singing Pretty Mary Sunlight. I think he did a good job singing the song. So his vocal talents were put to good use, just like Davy Jones. But whereas Davy Jones also had great charisma and had great chemistry with certain members of the gang and did want to help solve the mystery, I don't think Jerry Reed did that at all. I think he had the good vocal talents and they were showcased, which is good, but they didn't do the two essential things, which is having him be invested in the mystery and having him have good chemistry with the gang. And I don't think he had either. So to me, he's a poor guest star and wasn't utilized that well at all. I didn't like Jerry Reed in this episode. And then, of course, we have the villains of the episode. And oh my god, are these villains awful. I mean, they don't even dress up until the trap sequence at the end. That's the only time they dress up. Otherwise, you just see them in plain view, not dressed up. The audience has made clear that these two are the villains. They don't hide it at all. And we don't get to see them in costume in a persona. They just kind of dress up as the last minute as sort of a necessity. Like it's like the writers were just like, oh, we needed them to dress in costume for this last sequence. They haven't been in costume the whole episode. And they don't really go by a name. They go by either the Phantom, which is what they refer to him, or the possessed mannequins of the Viking and David Crockett. Whichever name you want to go by, they're awful, okay? They're not good at all. They barely get any screen time, and even when they do in the trap sequence, they're not scary, they're not fun or entertaining to watch. They were so much of an afterthought when it came to the costume villains of this episode. It's like they didn't even try. I feel like this episode really focused too much on hijinks, because I noticed with this episode, maybe more than the Jonathan Winters one, is that there was a lot of hijinks. And don't get me wrong, I like some good hijinks when it fits the story and when it's with the villain. But the villain doesn't even really do much. He just kind of turns the lights off, makes weird noises, steals the guitar. The villains are more annoyances than anything, rather than an actual threat. And that's a big problem in this episode. I'm supposed to feel that they're a threat, or I'm supposed to, and find them scary, or I'm supposed to find them funny and entertaining to watch and delightful in their villain performance. But I don't get either of that. So to me, the villains were completely useless. They were pretty much an afterthought. They made it clear who the villains were in the beginning, and it felt like they put them in costume because it's a Scooby Doo episode. They haven't been in costume for most of the episode. They have to be in something, so they just threw something together in the last minute. And to me, it was so much of an afterthought. It's like they didn't even try with the villains. So awful villains. Nothing really more to say besides that. So then we have the villains outside of costume, who are Ben Bing and Bertha, who were both uninteresting because they were revealed as villains way too soon and way too early, and we don't get to know them at all. They just kind of, they just are. Really, they're actually more the villains than their costume counterparts, you could say. they go for most of the episode. I mean, the guy dresses up as, like, Bertha. We never find out the guy's actual name. I would have just preferred they not even do that at all. I would have just preferred had it just been, like, maybe a couple, or had this actually just been a woman. It felt so unnecessary and felt out of left field to be like, oh yeah, by the way, this woman is not actually a woman, but a man. What the fuck? Like, where did that come from? That was unnecessary. Why even bother if you're not even going to give a name or, you know, get us interest or, you know, get more suspects into it, which is another problem that I have, which I'll get onto later. But yeah, they're not good outside of costume because they're just revealed as the villains way too soon, so we never get to know them as regular people before they're revealed as the villains, which is what I want when it comes to the outside of costume element, which I don't think we got. So to me, they were just as bad outside of costume, which is what they were for most of the episode, as they were in costume, which wasn't much. Then there's the motive of the episode, which I found to be repetitive and dull. So it was pretty much just a simple money motive. They pretty much were, you know, using the theater to dig a tunnel underground so that they can rob the bank, you know, of all its money. They robbed like $2 million. They were going to probably rob more. And they wanted to scare Jerry Reed and anybody else off of the property so that way they could continue robbing the bank without being discovered. So it was pretty much just a simple money motive, simple robbery, nothing special here, plain old boring money motive shit. So yeah, not a good motive, very simplistic, very dull, very repetitive. Then there was a lack of suspects in the episode. So we had 2 villains and naturally only 2 suspects. The problem is that they make it very clear that these 2 are the villains. And we never see anybody in costume beforehand. You know, there's no sign of this supposed phantom or until the very end of the episode. And even then, it's 2 of them, and they're just possessed. They're supposed to be possessed mannequins. So, because we learned that they're villains early on, and because we don't have more than 2 suspects in the episode, there's no way to suspect anybody else. I mean, the episode makes it very clear that these 2 are the villains from the beginning. They don't try to go for, you know, throwing anybody off or trying to create more suspects, which I think is a big problem. And the villains are mostly out of costume for most of the episodes. So yeah, there's nobody. They not only do they make it clear early on, but they don't add any more suspects to make it interesting and try to throw suspicion off of them. I found the mystery of the episode to be uninteresting, and to be quite honest, I didn't even feel like there was a mystery, but I did find something that maybe might be considered possibly the mystery of the episode. So what I think the episode was trying to make the mystery, you know, the mystery of the episode was supposed to be, was that the gang wanted to know why someone was stopping Jerry Reed from performing at the country music hall. That's what I assume the episode was trying to present as the mystery of the episode. The problem is that they don't present it in an engaging way at all. You know, it kind of just felt more like, to me, that this was the gang just seeing that their friend was in danger. They try to save their friend Jerry Reed, and once they rescue him, they pretty much just try to protect him from anybody who tries to stop him from rehearsing. Which is noble and great of them as friends, but to me, like, it just felt more like the villains were annoyances, and they weren't really an issue, and the gang were just trying to make sure Jerry Reed got through the night, was able to do his rehearsal without an issue. So, while there was technically a mystery here, I don't think it was presented in an engaging way at all. I don't think they did a good enough job making it interesting or engaging, so it was pretty uninteresting, and pretty much felt like an afterthought. Like, they just, you know, the gang just kind of felt like they were looking for their friend, trying to save him, and then protect him from, once they saved him, just protect him from any other, you know, occurrences that happened. There was absolutely no clues in this episode at all. None. Not that I can find any. Nothing of the sort. The gang just pretty much were running around, listening for Jerry Reed's voice, doing a lot of hijinks, and really, they just didn't find any clues at all. There was no clues to point towards a suspect, even though we knew who the villains were early on, so that was thrown out the window. There were no clues to point towards the motive until the very end, when it's revealed what Feebag actually means. But yeah, I mean, There was no clues to speak of. I don't think there was any at all that pointed towards a motive or a suspect or anything at all. So yeah, I didn't see any clues in the episode. Not one. And finally, to end my negatives off, the last thing I'll say is that I didn't like the atmosphere of the episode. I found it to be non-existent. I didn't feel any tension or suspense, and it was really mainly due to the fact that the villains were just more annoyances than anything rather than threats. And there was nothing natural in the setting that really got any spooky vibe out of it. Sure, it was like an old theater that was being reopened, but to me, I sensed no atmosphere in this episode, no tension or no suspense, no creepiness, no eeriness, just nothing to speak of. There was no atmosphere that I sensed in this episode, and it was really due to the fact that the villains were just awful in this episode, and the setting, nothing in the setting naturally helped make a compelling atmosphere. Overall, guys, I would not recommend this episode to fans and newcomers to the show. It is an awful episode, and it may very well be my least favorite episode of the new Scooby Doo movies. It's definitely most likely contending with that Harlem Globetrotters one, and I might even dislike it more. And I can see why I don't revisit this one. It's an awful episode. It doesn't do good with a lot of things, and even with the stuff it gets right, it's just not that amazing. And it's just not one that I think fans should go back to when they ask a new Scooby Doo Movies episode. Unless if you're a big fan of Jerry Reed and just want the novelty of him meeting the gang, I don't think this is an episode worth revisiting at all. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the review. Please give it a like if you did. Comment down below your thoughts on the episode. Do you like this episode? Do you think I'm being too harsh on it? Are there things that you see that I'm not seeing? Do you hate this episode? Are you like me? Do you consider it like an awful episode that just got a lot of things wrong and, you know, doesn't do a good job with Fred, Daphne, and Velma and the guest star and all these and the villains? Or are you somewhere in the middle where you just think it's okay, but it's not good or bad? I'm curious for your thoughts, so let me know. And subscribe for more Scooby Doo content like this, or if you're just interested in any of my other content, I'll have plenty more Scooby Doo content on the way, obviously as part of Scooby Month, but also, you know, when I get back after my Halloween special, you know, I'll continue doing more Scooby Doo reviews after that. You know, Scooby Doo is going to be the main focus of the channel from here on out, and I will make an announcement clarifying that and kind of explaining, you know, in October, I'll make an announcement explaining what direction the channel will be, which is a Scooby focused one, and that's because both you guys and I love talking Scooby, and I want to continue doing that because Scooby Doo is my favorite franchise. I love these characters, I love this franchise, and I want to continue talking about it, and I think it needs more attention and love and recognition. So if you love Scooby Doo and you love, you know, reviews on Scooby Doo shows, movies, games, and books that you don't think get talked about enough, come join the channel because I'll have plenty of reviews on the way for all that stuff. You can also follow me on Facebook where I have discussions about things we talk about on both my channels, and Twitch where I hope to live stream in the future. So that ends my 2024 summer special. I want to thank you guys so much for joining me throughout the whole summer and watching all these Scooby Doo reviews. If you did miss the summer special, I have a whole playlist from beginning to end throughout this entire summer of all the Scooby Doo reviews that I did this summer. So if you want to go back and rewatch it, you're more than happy to. I have a whole playlist of it. But this will, of course, not be the last of Scooby, as in my next video, I will begin my 2024 Scooby Month with a re-review rather, of Season 1, Episode 10 of Scooby Doo, Where Are You?, which will be the last re-review on the list. I'm going to be ending off my re-reviews to start off my my 2024 Scooby Month, and then, you know, we'll continue, and then, of course, after that, we will continue my reviews of the new Scooby Doo movies with Season 1, Episode 15 of the new Scooby Doo movies, titled The Caped Crusader Caper, guest starring Batman and Robin again. Oh man, I'm so excited to go back to Batman and Robin. I am really pumped to go back to this episode. I love Batman and Robin. I thought the first episode was decent, so I'm really excited to see Batman and Robin again, and I have high expectations going into this episode. And I'm sure many of you guys do as well, because this episode that is held in high regard. So I really hope it holds up well. Maybe it'll beat out the first episode. Let's hope it does. But yeah, if you want to hear my thoughts on the second Batman and Robin episode after that, you can come check it out. after my final re-review of Scooby Doo Warrior, which is Bedlam and the Big Top. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and as always, peace out.
Hey, Scooby! Scooby, Scooby Doo, looking for you. Scooby, Scooby Doo, where are you? All the stars are here, waiting for you. Couldn't have a show without you. Scooby, Scooby Doo, Scooby, Scooby Doo. Scooby, Scooby-Doo, Scooby.
Hey, Scooby! Where are you?
Over here.